Hey, Matt Shatskin for Warrior Logistician here underneath the shade tree at the Army War College. And you're actually hearing the noontime bugle call in the background. We have bugle calls throughout the day. And I'm going to talk about a few things today. Hopefully you've got some questions out there and I can provide some interesting things to think about. So to get started, I want to thank you for tuning in. If you're out there watching or you're going to watch this later. And I want to tell you first about some things that I'm working on, some projects that you might find interesting and might be of value to you. At any time, type in your questions and I'll stop talking about what I'm talking about and really talk about what you want to talk about, which is why I'm here. I will sign off at 12:30, so get your questions in while you have the chance. So the first thing I want to talk about is a series of videos I'm working on about the beer game, and this will include narration from me, products you can use, spreadsheets you can use, and other things you can use to understand and run the beer game. So what is the beer game? Beer game's not about drinking beer. That's what a lot of people think. It's actually could be the cookie game or it could be the widget game. It's a game used to understand the supply chain. So I'm working on that. Expect to put that out here in the next week or so, at least the first two parts, which is an orientation on how to set up the beer game, and then number two is how to run the beer game. And I'm hoping that that will provide value to people of various populations, military, non-military, practitioners, academics, and educators alike. So I'm working on that. Also put in a proposal this past week to work on something for the Army G4. Analysis of the previous studies that have been done on our ability to deploy and distribute in support of expeditionary forces in an expeditionary setting, which is particular areas of interest to me. I've done some work and had some experience in this area, so excited about that proposal. I think there's a certain probability that that'll be approved. I'm not holding my breath, but still excited to just see the possibility of that going through. Just finished the book The Inevitable by Kevin Kelly, and I'm looking forward to putting out a review on video about that. Just filmed it yesterday, and you should expect to see that in the next week or so as well. In the meantime, as you're waiting for that, the short is that I definitely recommend that book if you're trying to understand how the world has changed and will continue to change. Would recommend that to anyone trying to broaden their horizon in that regard. Talk about some more readings that I have in the queue very quickly. First is The Marketplace of Attention by Webster, published on MIT Press. About a third of the way through this book, and Webster looks at what people spend their time on in the digital age, which is ironically a lot more difficult to track than in the industrial age, where we had things like Nielsen ratings, and when people tuned into TV, we could know that that's what they were doing. Now there's many other ways to get people's attention, and there's many things that people can spend their attention on. So that's what Webster starts to get into and goes into the various thoughts behind that. So that's an interesting read. What I have in the queue is a number of things. The blockchain revolution. If you haven't heard about blockchain, this is a new concept. Somewhat came out of Bitcoin, from my understanding, in terms of how to move money. But it has to do with even more than money, really how to move information quickly and not just confined to the supply chain, but in the digital age. So it's an area I don't know much about. I'm looking forward to learning more about it. The sharing economy gets at how we not only share information, but how the economy has changed by the aspect that more of our life is about sharing information than just giving information when it's requested. So looking forward to reading that book as well. And then engineering systems in the digital age. Again, really my current view on the world is the world is a system of systems. The digital age and the Internet of Things has resoundingly changed that. So the question is, how has it changed that, and what major systems, and what do I need to take out of that, as well as how does that refer back to the supply chain? And then finally, The Power of Resilience by Sheffy. Those of you who don't know Sheffy, he works out of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and runs a resiliency center as one of their centers of excellence within MIT. And he has written several books. His focus area is resilience in supply chain, and he's also written a number of articles. So I am interested in resiliency in supply chains as response to disruption, which is another thing I wanted to talk about today. Because my current book and my previous work is on what I call emergency supply chains, and I've made this claim that emergency supply chains merit their own framework because they're different from commercial supply chains. And the closest thing we see in commercial supply chains to emergency supply chains is this response to disruption, but still disruption is not what we have, what's going on in an emergency supply chain. And so therefore emergency supply chains merit their own framework. So I want to bolster this assertion I've made by understanding more of what emergency supply chains are not, and therefore this idea of disruption within commercial supply chains and the ability to respond to disruptions. And this constitutes a measurement or the notion of supply chain resiliency. And so Sheffy's done a lot of work in this area. There's also been others who have taken a look at this. Some have just done a thorough literature review on the nature of resiliency within the supply chain, which I'm guessing is probably somewhat contentious in terms of how you define that. Like the word resiliency as we use in the Army, if you line up 5 people, they'll probably define resiliency in 5 different ways. And so that may be what we find here. Others have modeled resiliency and done it by a technique called linear programming. And so what they've looked at is what is the balance, what is the optimal point between redundancy, which before potential disruptions, which is things like keeping overage stock or having redundant nodes, versus the cost of responsiveness. So no additional stock or no redundant nodes, or very little, but more of an emphasis on the ability to respond to disruption, activate additional new nodes, or probably in that instance more likely to activate contingency type of partnerships to leverage existing nodes that are not in the active network. So these particular authors I'm thinking of actually put numbers to this and found points at which this was optimal to do based on the type of product. So overall, I'm interested in learning more about this concept, and then how we can apply this to Army supply chains and how it doesn't apply, and then what further work and potential there is to do in commercial supply chains. And related to this is another thing that I'm working on, which is the ability to model processes, specifically to model resiliency and the ability to respond to disruptions within commercial and military supply chains, but also modeling for the purpose of seeking optimization on how supply chains can optimally work based on minimizing cost and maximizing demand satisfaction and fill rate. So to accomplish that, I've started a program of self-study in the simulation platform ExtendSim, which is what I worked on for my dissertation. And ExtendSim has a lot of capability. I think it's relatively easy to use if you understand PowerPoint and some concepts of mathematics. Then you can definitely get started in ExtendSim, and there's some good tutorials. I've talked about modeling in the past. It's been a while, but I do believe that modeling is very appropriate for some tactical processes, as well as simple things like running a range, loading a boat, loading a railhead, and those kind of things. Hey Antonio, good to see you. I always like your posts, and I hope you're doing well. So if you just checked in, please feel free to punch in a question or just give a shout out or whatever you feel like doing, so I know you're out there, and especially if you've got something on your mind, I'd certainly like to talk about it and provide any insight that I possibly could attempt to do. Moving on, I'm looking out a little bit in the future. I've got an Army Leader Exchange event planned with the Center of Army Leadership. That'll be on the 19th of September in the morning from 9:30 to 11. And that actually is a program. You can find it here on Facebook, Army Leader Exchange. It's not to the class there at Leavenworth. I don't know how much I'm leading from the front, sitting under here the shade tree, but thanks, Airborne all the way. So, if you're there on the ground at Leavenworth, please see if you have interest in coming out. It's going to be there in the Lewis and Clark building. And if you're not there at Leavenworth and you can't make it, my understanding is it'll be live streamed and recorded as well. So it'll be neat to see you at those events if you can make it. What else? What else is interesting to me? Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about my book, Understanding the Complexity of Emergency Supply Chains, available out there on Amazon in Kindle and hard copy. Looking at Joe Quengo writes, "Sir, we added your book to the collection of Logistics Management Institute Library. Used a couple examples during our research with FEMA. Hope all is well all the way, sir." Great, Joe. I'm glad to hear you're still enjoying your time out there at LMI, and I've lost track of how much time you've got out there, but I'm eager to hear what's next for you. Somehow it sticks in my mind that you're coming near the end of your time there, but I might be wrong. So, what else? So I'll go ahead and answer some questions before you ask them, but could easily be diverted to the questions that are more important to you. And so I want to talk about two areas really that have to deal with reading, since I've already talked about resiliency and disruptions and emergency and that sort of thing, although I can come back to that if that's what you're interested in, or other things. So I get this question a lot, which is, what should I be reading? And my short answer is, this is a highly individualized question. And if you really want the optimal answer to that, you have to take ownership of this question in the first place. So if I were to issue you a reading list, that isn't really your reading list. That's what I think you should be reading. And the first thing would be to evaluate that reading list and then go from there. But in general terms, I think that we could boil this down to be a little bit basic. So we have within your foundation breadth and depth. Breadth is what you're currently in, learning more about that. That's depth. I think I might have said breadth, but that's depth. And then what is closely related but you're not currently in is breadth. So a simple example would be if you're a maintainer, then learning more and getting more breadth degree of on maintenance and how to maintain would give you depth. But then learning about something that's close to maintenance but not maintenance would be breadth. So supply, learning more about supply, learning more about related functions, potentially transportation. That's a very narrow scope there. And so that relates back to your foundation. So if you're early in your career in these things, then I would assess your foundation, and I would probably have a distribution of reading, maybe 50-50 or even less, maybe 70-30 in that area. But I wouldn't stay there too long because you kind of want to get out there and visualize things differently from the outside. So this is called outside breadth and depth. This is what I call category 3, lack of a better term, and that's things that don't have anything to do with breadth and depth. So I'm getting some questions in, so I'll stop from that. Chip Daniel L. Edwards. Hey Chip, I'm very interested in your supply chain modeling, especially the last tactical mile, which I think has declined, especially with the O grade going to multifunctional. Well, Chip, there's certainly a lot we could model of the last tactical mile. I would agree, and I would say that's been an enduring problem. I've talked about that before, particularly in the Logstat video that's on Warrior Logistician, and I think that, I don't know why we have not spent much time modeling the last tactical mile. There may be folks that don't really understand the value of modeling, and so when you start talking about putting numbers to processes, they may feel there's too much fog and friction in the last tactical mile, and it's just too hard to do. I don't really know. I have some other theories on why not, but I will say this, that I think that we could benefit from more discrete event modeling. That's really what a log pack is, or any kind of distribution or issuing is, to kind of understand what's going on there and how we could do better. I'm hesitant to say things like optimize, because that gets people saying, well, you can't optimize tactical operations, there's just too much fog and friction. So I'll move on. Joe Quenga writes in, headed to DLA Energy at the end of July. I'm trying to remember where that is. I don't know if it's around here or not. We'll send our grad school fellowship research on federal emergency and continuity readiness to you. Thanks. I'd love to see it, Joe. Very interesting. So if you just tuned in, we're happy to have you. Thanks for punching in. Good to see you today on a bright sunny day underneath the shade tree here at the Army War College on Warrior Logistician. And eager to see what's on your mind and how I can help. So I talked a little bit about breadth, depth, and then outside your area. So going back to those, if you feel you've got a good foundation of breadth and depth, or sufficient, I would see what is outside your area that you should be learning about, because this is where I think some folks might fail. They think they've got to stay in breadth and depth, and so it's kind of like the bench presser that keeps doing bench press. And so they go from 235 to 305 or to 400, and so that they're really, really good at bench press, but they're not that good at anything else. And that's fine if you want to be one of the world's best bench pressers, and there's those folks and there's places for those people, and that's great. But we may be missing something by not looking out here. So the key is to see what's out here and then see the connections and the relationship back to what you're doing, or understand that there is no relationship. That, to me, I think is the real critical thinking comes. And if you want some self-development, that's where you should look and seek to go. So what should you be reading out here? I don't know. I can certainly make some recommendations. Again, think about how much time do I spend out here, how much time do I spend here, and how much time do I spend here? Is it 20, 30, and then 50. I don't know. But the main thing is the answer is up to you. And I would think maybe you get feedback on this if you really are not sure, but you got to own the answer. So if somebody says, I think you should be doing 80% out here, and you're not good with 80, well then don't do 80. Do 50, or do whatever's appropriate to you. But that's a simple way of thinking it. Depth, breadth, and then everything else. And if you don't get out here, then you'll be one of these people that looks at every problem the same way if you never get past this. So that's probably enough about what to read. Miss MX Jr. says, great info, thanks. Glad to have you on here today. If you just tuned in, saw some likes coming in, and I certainly appreciate it. Just check in and give a shout out or punch in your questions. We've got about 9 minutes left, and looking to maximize those really with what you're interested in talking about, not necessarily me. Let's talk about very quickly how to read. A common mistake is that every book gets equal attention, and so you quickly, if you approach the world this way, you quickly, in the digital age especially, you quickly get overwhelmed. There's just too much to read. I can't do it. And so you probably read less than you should be doing. And then your brain is not really growing the way it should be. So do the opposite. Be selective. Be judicious in what you choose to read. And the way to do that, there's a few simple techniques. I didn't come up with many of these, so it's not like I claim that this is an original idea. So the first is, after doing this analysis of how much time you need to spend where, look at what the author's credentials are. So if I see this book and I think I might be interested in this, I first need to know about Sheffy and who he is, what his credentials are, what kind of work he's done in this area, what qualifies him to write about this, and what his biases are. And so I can do that by just reading the back cover, probably. And then I can, well, maybe I don't want to read this, or I want to look at this further, but I haven't committed to reading it fully yet. Then I want to read, well, what is the book about? And that's usually here on the back cover, or it's on the inside. And read that word for word, and then assess, is this something that's going to contribute to my development and my knowledge needs? Yes or no? Or maybe. And so if it's yes or maybe, then I keep looking further. I still am not going to read everything word for word. Maybe I'll read the introduction and the conclusion word for word. Or maybe the first paragraph of the introduction and the first paragraph of the conclusion, and then the last paragraph of both. But you see, I'm still easing my way into this before I fully commit. Let's suppose I do fully commit, and I say, yep, I'm going to spend some time with this book. If you try to read this book or any book word for word, you're really missing the big picture. Reading a book word for word, it's not about, I don't know if you're ever going to really need to do that. What you need to get out of the book is, what are the major points of the book and how are you going to apply them? That's what's most important, and that's why reading is largely an individualized effort. So what I have tried lately is reading the first topic sentence or the topic sentence of each paragraph in a chapter. I call this my first pass. And then I ask myself, do I understand the major points the author is trying to bring to bear? And if sometimes topic sentences aren't very good, or they're not really the topic sentence, maybe the second sentence in a paragraph is what the paragraph is all about. So you kind of do that as you go through. Maybe read the first two sentences of the paragraph, but it's not a foolproof formula. The major thing is that you are not reading word for word. You're thinking about, what is the larger point? So instead of trying to see every tree in the forest, I'm trying to see the forest and understand the forest. That's really what learning is all about. Got a few bugs out here today, and they are living up to their name. So I call this the first pass, reading that first topic sentence. Then the second pass, I come back and do that again and read just a little bit deeper where I need to. And then maybe the third pass is I highlight some key things. Now you may think about this and say, man, 3 passes on a chapter, that sounds like more time. Well, it actually isn't. And I would propose that reading with this method actually is less time. You've got to put a goal. So and it's got to be a feasible goal. You can't say you're going to read a book a day if that's just not feasible. My last goal was to read and review a book a week, and it has taken me a little bit longer to do that with everything else and work and life and all that kind of stuff. So make a feasible goal of how quickly you want to read a book each week, and commit to not reading every word. Make a deal with yourself that you're going to be very selective about what you read, and then don't be afraid to back out of stuff. So you get through the 5th chapter and you say, this book is really not what I thought it was going to be, made a bad decision, but you can ditch it. You can ditch it. Make sure that you own that decision though. So there's some ideas about how to read and how to not get intimidated by the vast amount of information that's out there. Got about 4 minutes left. Saw some folks check in and like. So if you've got something on your mind, please punch it in, type it in, and I'll get to it. If not, if you don't have any question on your mind, just punch in, give me a shout out so I know you're out there. And I can say hi to you here on Facebook. One thing I didn't mention about up front of some things that I'm working on and things that I'm looking forward to is the most important thing, which is I'm going camping this weekend with my family, and I'm really hyped about that. It's going to be our first family camping adventure, one of 3 that we have scheduled, and I'm pretty stoked about going off and doing that. We got a lot of equipment. We've been making a lot of preparation, so this is going to be a good thing either way. So about 3 minutes left. Looking forward to what you've got on your mind. Talked about a lot of things today. Talked about some projects. Talked about my book. Talked about some videos I have coming up. Beer game videos about supply chain. Understanding that. Look for that soon. There'll be a lot of materials with that. Instruction on how to do it. As video instruction, as well as the materials on how to do it, how to analyze it. Even going to model the beer game when I can, so that we can get a little bit past the actual game itself. Looking to put out some book reviews, quick reviews on video, less than 2 minutes, so that you can help you make those choices in selective reading. Looking forward to potentially doing a project on expeditionary sustainment of expeditionary forces. Hope is not a plan, but hopefully that will get approved here in the somewhat near future, and that would take me through this next year, and hopefully a team of others. So that'd be exciting as well. And then working on modeling skills in Extend Sim, and what we can learn there by modeling processes, both military and otherwise. One last thing I failed to mention is some good Facebook blogs and other forms of social media for you that I've encountered lately. Logistics and War, ran by a friend of mine named Dave Beaumont, who's a lieutenant colonel in the Australian Army. Some very good stuff there. Dave is a full-time researcher, at least currently, so he's got a lot of depth to his content. Recommend you check that out. Also some good content from the military leader and the tactical leader, which are both run by majors in the Army. Some good content there, both on Facebook and other places. So, and they've got further networks that they encourage, and you can check them out. There's the Strategy Bridge for some military, more on the strategic side. Haven't really looked at that in depth, but from what I've initially seen, some good stuff out there. And you can start your own as well. That's the amazing thing about today in the digital age. is that it doesn't really take much for you to find your voice and find your contributions out there. Really not much overhead at all. Decided to do this live cast this morning. Just had a good leg day in the gym, the most important day of physical exercise of the week. I felt kind of motivated and thought I'd punch in there, just do the short and fast get out there to you. Thanks for the folks who tuned in today, and if you're watching this after the fact, thanks for you as well. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question here today, please ask it anyway. Please give me some feedback on this video, and let me know if this was value to you. Antonio, home on vacation for a couple weeks. Take care and keep Warrior Logistician going strong. Always a pleasure all the way. Thanks for the great feedback. Enjoy your vacation. I'd stay off social media the whole time. Out. So it's 12:31. I'm going to punch out. You guys take care, and thanks for tuning in.